In this module, we're going to talk about metacognition, and that might be a new term for you, and you can follow along in your handouts about what I'm going to be covering. But before we talk about teaching kids reading comprehension strategies or reading thinking strategies, those are things like making connections, inferring, asking questions. We're going to learn about more of those in depth. And what we're trying to do is we transition from just teaching kids how to read into teaching kids that these are things that good readers do. So you may or may not realize it, but when you read and you interact with a text, you're doing things in your head that you maybe haven't thought about before. So that's what we're going to address in this next part of the class. But before we start teaching the actual strategies, we have to teach the kids about what it means to think about their reading. And so we start by teaching them about something called metacognition. So metacognition is literally thinking about my thinking. So we teach kids that they can think about what they're thinking about. And so we're definitely taking things onto a little bit of a deeper level than just reading and answering questions. Instead, we're going to be asking them to do a lot of things like talking and conversing with each other and really thinking about what they're reading, what they're connecting to, and what they're thinking. Okay, so the best description of this is we try to teach kids that there's a difference between fake reading and real reading. And I know that you have done this before because we all have. So fake reading is something like this. So I'm looking at the article front page, Learning and Detecting Emergent Behavior in Networks of Cardiac Myocytes. And I'm just going to read the abstract to you. You can follow along. We address the problem of specifying and detecting emergent behavior in networks of cardiac myocytes, spiral electric waves in particular, a precursor to atrial and ventricular fibrillation. To solve this problem, we, number one, apply discrete mode abstraction to the cyclilinear hybrid automata, CLHA, and we have recently developed for modeling the behavior of the myocyte networks. Number two, introduce the new concept of spatial superposition of the CLHA modes. Three, develop a new spatial logic based on spatial superposition for specifying emergent behavior. Four, devise a new method for learning the formula of this logic from the spatial patterns under investigation. Now I'm going to stop right there. I was fake reading. The important thing to notice is I was actually sounding really good. I was sounding like a reader. I was sounding like a good reader. I was pausing, phrasing, emphasizing certain words over others. I really sounded like I knew what I was doing. But in reality, this is a text I don't have very many connections to, and I wasn't really thinking about what I was reading. I was just going through the motions of it. So even though I sounded like I was reading and doing a good job, I was actually fake reading. When I review this, the one thing I can apply to my life, my mom had a heart attack, and so the words atrial and ventricular, those sound familiar terms to me because I remember those kind of words being spoken in the hospital. And then, of course, I just kind of understand the setup of research article because of doing my own research. And then anytime there was a word cardiac, I knew that that is about the heart. But in general, I really don't know what this article is about. And that is fake reading. So I know that you've all done this before. You've been reading a book for homework, a textbook, or a chapter book. You start over on the left side, you read all the way through and all the way down to the second page. And all of a sudden you stop and you think, wait a minute, I'm not sure what I just read. And so instead, you have to go back, reread, use different strategies, do something so that you actually comprehend and connect with the text. So fake reading happens to little kids, older kids, adults, everybody, okay? So on the other hand, when I flip the page over and I look at this best practice in reading textbook example, and I start reading on the second paragraph where it says, this week, the Basil has a story for children to listen to and visualize as the teacher reads the text, but there are no pictures because the majority of my students are second language learners. It is imperative that I modify this lesson. No one will get anything out of the auditory activity without any props, illustrations, or clues about the text. So I can connect to that. That is my career. It's making sense to me. I know what they're talking about. I would just want you to realize that you are learning how to become a teacher and taking specialized classes for that. So, a cardiologist might be able to read out of your reading textbook and not be able to connect with it as well as you might think he or she could. Okay, so you are connecting and learning and specializing in certain ways. So that's the example between real reading and fake reading. And I actually have kids practice this skill, and I tell them to go back to their seats and get their books out and then see if they feel like they're real reading something or if maybe they're actually just fake reading when it's reading time. A friend of mine, Tanny McGregor, has written a book, and she created a great visual to help us understand what metacognition is and that we can share that with our kids. So I know you have a copy of this, but when you combine a text, whatever it is that you're reading, with thinking about what's going on in your head, like what you're thinking about, where those two things come together is real reading. Real reading happens when the text plus your thinking come together, and that's real reading. And so this is a great visual. And again, she's reminding us up here that metacognition is thinking about my thinking, and I would definitely encourage you to hang this up in your class and share this visual with your students. Okay, so this is metacognition. The last thing I'm going to do is, this is her book. This is a cover of her book, and I encourage you to look for it. And I'm just going to read to you the first page from her chapter on metacognition because I think it's really important and emphasizes this concept. Metacognition, it's the thought that counts. I first encountered the concept of metacognition as an 18-year-old college student at Miami University of Ohio. In my educational psychology text, I read how John Flavel used the term in the 1970s. He believed we were capable of monitoring our thoughts, of thinking about our thinking. As my professor explained this concept, I immediately thought, wow, I do this. I think about my own thinking all the time. I just didn't know what to call it. I was surprised to learn that researchers had studied metacognition and were examining the implications for teaching and learning. It's an amazing sensation to discover that the world knows about something that had heretofore belonged solely to you. I see it happen with kids. I introduce metacognition to my students, and as we talk, kids start to grin and nod. Many of them already know. We're noticing and naming our thinking. Maybe they aren't yet metacognitive about their reading, but that's where I come in, providing opportunities for practice. I don't know how to teach thinking strategies unless I begin with metacognition. Taking time to explore metacognition sets a foundation on which to build. In making kids aware of how they think about their own thinking, I open a channel through which purposeful conversation can flow. With every group of students I teach, no matter the grade level, no matter the subject area, I spend time noticing, naming, and exploring metacognition. Every conversation thereafter is richer. So I don't care if it's a first grader or a 10th grader, teaching them to think about their thinking and then be able to talk about it is the most important step before we even jump into teaching about comprehending what we're reading. All right, so I hope you feel like you have learned a new term or at least understand it better in metacognition. And this really sets the stage so that we can jump into the rest of the reading strategies.